report. We have Lowell Ponte on, who's an excellent author, along with his co-author Craig Smith, on a number of books on, and Don't Bank on It is one of the latest of his books. And your articles and analysis of what's going on in Greece are pretty, I want to call shocking, state of realism. I use the analogy after these three latest articles you've sent me, the latest one today. This is like a flash of just the part of the Christmas carol where the spirit of Christmas is yet to come, is pointing a bony finger out of a dark, shawled kind of a, if you want to call it, specter, to the gravestone of Ebenezer Scrooge, where he lies in the grave and there's no one around. And the demise of Greece is literally a foreshadowing of what's happening, along with the rules and laws that are passed around, including bailing in Cyprus a few years ago, to the current state of affairs here in America and Western nations. It's like that saying, do not say who the bell tolls for, the bell tolls for you, O America, O England, O Canada, etc. As the Greeks go down, the Jenga sticks, and a lot of them say that they've walled off the economy so they can't hurt people's stock portfolios or the value of their wages or their future salary increases. And I have to think, I don't know how long they can sell this delusion, but eventually this house of cards is going to fall. And of course it's by design, because the globalists, the first step they want to do is get rid of money. And they'll have a new system there. That system will then be cashless, so you won't be able to have physical cash in your pocket. They'll even make the use of alternative currencies like Bitcoin and gold and silver, probably try to make them illegal, although they're not going to be able to, because they're universal currencies, including even trading in art and other kind of collectibles and so on. These are other forms of, if you want to call it, repository income and storage of value. Because I just can't see this game going on much longer, do you?
No, I can't. I mean, Greece is going down, having a debt equivalent to about 176% of its gross domestic product, meaning the debt is almost twice as big as what it makes. In the U.S., our official debt on an annual basis is about 101% of our gross domestic product. But in any event, we owe more than we're making. And that's getting progressively worse, and as that happens, things become inevitable, especially since in the U.S. today we have 49.5% of households where somebody living there, and this is half of the households in America, where somebody living there gets a government benefit check of some kind. Once you do that, it's awfully hard to go back, short of a disaster that just knocks the whole system down. So Greece is pretty well doomed. Greece's reproduction rate has fallen by about a third. That is, they're no longer anywhere close to being able to reproduce their native population. They're being swamped by Muslims coming from North Africa, across the Mediterranean, who just want the land. They're not really seeking job opportunities, because job opportunities don't mean all that much in Greece, even though in the welfare state that they build out of borrowed money and out of benefits since World War II, including a U.S. defense umbrella that saved them the cost of having to defend themselves, they created a system where, as you say, if you're a radio announcer, if you're a beautician, if you're in any of 1,200 privileged professions, you can retire at age 50 with 80% of your highest lifetime income paid to you in a government pension. I mean, that's a more lavish welfare arrangement than they have in Germany. And Germany actually does produce things. Right.
Now, I do believe that you're correct when you say from NATO to Greebricks. I think that the Greeks have a couple more cards to play, maybe not one. The first one is that the Russians have offered to put a pipeline in from Russia, which freaks the heck out of people. Even the Turks are willing to try to help the Greeks, which are mortal enemies for thousands of years. And the Chinese, who are heavily invested in Greece, which means when the Greeks start to have teeter in their economy, it affected negatively the Chinese stock market. So they're heavily invested, but they're going to increase their investments because they want to get a major input directly into the European economy. And of course, Greece is a full member, Turkey is not. And the problem is that if Greece goes, the European Union is dead. And I think that Greece is going to go in the next few years. I think it's going to leave the European Union. It has no choice because it just cannot service these debts. I mean, this month, when Greece cannot service that IMF and the European Central Bank debt, it's going to go. It's going to cause an earthquake. It's not walled off like a lot of fools are saying out there. Oh, don't worry. Be happy. They're playing Bobby McFerrin in the background. Don't worry. Be happy. If you worry, then you double your trouble. I don't think so. What do you think?
Well, here's the situation. Let's take a step back and understand how we got into this mess in the short term. Then we can talk later about how they got into the mess in the long term. In the short term, in 1999, as in the famous song by Prince, Europe suddenly began to embrace a new currency called the euro. The euro came out of almost nowhere as an attempt to compete with the U.S. as a major continental currency, a rival to the U.S. dollar. What is the euro really? The euro is really the Deutschmark in disguise. It is Germany's third attempt in the 20th century to conquer Europe. It was to create a Europe-wide currency that basically Germany, as the economically dominant power on the continent, would control. And you notice this is all being viewed quite accurately as a contest between German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the Greek leadership. Well, that's quite true. Now, Germany thought this would be a wonderful way to capture a lot of little nations, but it did not listen to Nobel laureate economist Milton Friedman, who warned them, even before this happened, it cannot work. You cannot have anything like equality in a continent where basically one country controls the money supply for everybody else. That then becomes one colonial ruler with a lot of little colonies around it. And that, in fact, is what Greece became. The problem that Germany did not adequately calculate is that countries had looked at Greece and said, Greece is a profligate, lazy, worthless nation. It's a mañana nation. And whenever they get into debt, they just print more drachmas and pay the debt off with worthless paper money, and everybody's happy because everybody knows Greece doesn't really deserve much credit for anything. Problem was, when Greece lied to the Eurozone mechanism and pretended that it owed a lot less money than it really did, with the help of, by the way, people like Goldman Sachs and others, in order to get into the Eurozone. Once Greece was a Euro country, suddenly it had almost universal credit, something that it had never had before. It was like giving teenage boys whiskey and car keys and mom and dad's unlimited $1 million credit card. I mean, it did not end well. Greece began spending literally like a drunken Greek sailor. They began borrowing phenomenal amounts of money. Now, why would anyone lend to them? Because the bankers, even in Germany, looked and said, Germany has to defend the Eurozone, and therefore it will not allow a Eurozone country to go broke. So we're really lending money to somebody backed by the credit, the co-signing of Germany itself. Right. So we don't have to worry about lending the money. That, by the way, has cost Germany about $600 billion.
But it's also done something else. It's passed through the money. A lot of people think, well, this money is going to Greece. No, more than 90% of the money goes back from the Greeks that now owe this money to the banks that lend it to them, and which is a strange kind of arrangement. In other words, what they're doing is they're actually servicing interest on the debt, which is so monstrous now that very little of the actual physical money goes to build infrastructure, provide social services, build new hospitals, or do anything. So their economy is contracting. And you see, this contraction, by the way, is the I call it the forward velocity, just like the lift you need for the Wright brothers to get airborne. The forward velocity of an economy means if it doesn't move forward, it has no lift. If it has no lift, it crashes and burns. And that's not just happening on a Greek level. There are hot spots all over the world, including China and elsewhere in America, where our forward velocity is dropping. In these three articles, I think I'm going to post all three of them up. One of the I like to use a little bit of I call dark metaphor. Don't eat pig. Portugal, Italy, and Greece, and Spain, and of course, what's happening is, and Ireland, of course. That's why you have two eyes there.
these nations have in common, except for Ireland? Why, at one point or another in their history, they were all under degrees of Islamic domination. For example, when the Ottoman Turks overthrew the Christian Byzantine Empire in 1453, the eastern half of the Roman Empire that survived until within 50 years of Columbus, nevertheless, it fell. And when it fell, that meant Greece was subsumed by Muslim rule from Turkey for 376 years. I argue that for Greece, which was a culture that created two golden ages under the Byzantines and in Greece's own golden age, they were suddenly transformed by the kind of oppression that Islam created. While Europe was having the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, Greece was under Islamic rule and got none of it. So Greece today is the same kind of country you might see in Spain, which was under Muslim rule for 800 years, or Portugal, it was under Muslim rule for 500 years, or parts of southern Italy that were under Saracen rule for varying periods of time. But all these had their impact on culture. The kind of impact that the rest of Europe is now only beginning to experience, where Muslims are sweeping into the country and they're having an average of 3.4 children per couple, while Europeans are having about 1.4 children per couple, meaning they're not able to reproduce themselves.
And it's not just per couple. The average, for example, Palestinian man has 3 wives and 14 children. The average Jewish man has 1.1 children.
Whatever happened to King David and King Solomon, who had 300 to 1,000 wives and concubines each?
Yeah. Well,
now that polygamy is the next step after gay marriage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. Polygamy, of course it will be. I mean, how are they going to challenge it now they've opened the door? And how can they call it marriage, by the way, when you have 2 people that can't reproduce except using surrogate motherhood or a laboratory to create a fetus that may be a genetic clone of one or the other, or a recombination of the both individuals?
Now that is a profound question.
Well, they had a rabbinical council 12 years ago that actually met in Haifa that actually said that it was perfectly fine to pass on your assets to your descendant that may be a genetic clone of yourself in a gay marriage. That was a rabbinical council in Israel. People need to realize what's really going on. And the destruction of the family, right now, by and large, quote, religion in Europe is to maintain the buildings. It has nothing to do with public religion, because in many ways they've sort of banned true Christianity across Europe. It's dead. And we see that to a great extent in Canada, where if you open your mouth and speak out about things from a Christian point of view, you're considered anathema. It's just ridiculous.
Oh, it's more than that. If you quote the Bible in ways that are deemed offensive by certain groups, you can be fined, you can be sued, you can be jailed.
Well, I had a radio show there when I went back to Canada for a few years, between 2004 and 2008. I had a radio show there as well as my show in Genesis here, starting in 2005. And they threatened to actually arrest me. And I said, come on into the studios, I dare you. They were kind of like, this guy's brash, man. He's telling us, please come on in here and arrest me on air while I'm on air. And they wouldn't dare do it, so they shut down the show, which is broadcast right across Canada. But they continually threatened, and eventually they fired my boss, rehired him, said, we can't bring Deagle on, or you're out of here, bud. And your career will be over. We'll make sure we, basically ruin your reputation so you can't get hired anywhere else.
Well, you see, this is the great surrender of Western culture and what it was. Once upon a time, Greek Golden Age culture was astonishing. We talk about Columbus sailing to see if the world was round. Well, the ancient Greeks not only knew it was round, but their mathematician Eratosthenes actually calculated to within 40 miles the 25,000-mile circumference of the Earth. And he did that in, the 1st century A.D. or so. Or pardon me, the 2nd century B.C., before Christ.
B.C., yeah. Before Christ, yeah.
I mean, the Greeks were brilliant once upon a time. They not only gave us democracy, albeit not quite as we practice it today, but they also gave us any number of other valuable social ideals. And on top of all of that, they defeated the Persians. We forget the Persian Empire came close to invading Europe, in which case we would have grown up speaking Farsi in all likelihood and engaged in a kind of Persian totalitarian satrap. Here,
right.
We would not have been what is known as Western Europe with its unique ideas and concepts of freedom. And that's all because the Greeks were able to stop them at a few battles.
I think the Greeks are going to be the next Icelandic people. Icelandic people, was 2 years ago, they told the European central banks to take a long hike off a short bridge or short pier, and what happened is their economy is doing fantastic now. Here's what I think, 1 or 2 years from now, Greek is going to make a deal with the Russians, bring in a pipeline. The Turks are freaked out about it. The Chinese are going to do massive investments. You're going to see Russian Navy, not only in Syria, but you're going to see them in Greece. You're going to see giant naval containers and so on. You're going to see container lines coming in from China to Greece, and Greece will be the offload port for giant container ports. You'll see Greece's economy take off like a rocket with these islands already given back for 25 years to Russia and to China. So they're going to modernize them like crazy for tourism. I think the Greeks are just going to say, to heck with this dealing with the West and the dirty deals.
And by the way, something to watch this week, July the 8th, there is going to be a meeting of the BRICS nations in Moscow. We will see if Mr. Tsipras, the Greek radical left prime minister, is there for that meeting or not. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is an alternative power and economic bloc to the U.S. and the West.
Right, and I think that the dirty deals are even the geoengineering of the climate to cause the biggest drought in history in South America, affecting the largest city in the southern hemisphere, Sao Paulo, Brazil. 24 million people in the city and another umpteen millions in the surrounding area. Sao Paulo is in catastrophe right now, and it's clearly caused by geoengineering of the world climate. Just why the same way as the climate of the western United States is geoengineered in a catastrophic state. We're moving into a moderate cooling period, so we should be having an increased rainfall and a drop in temperature about 4 to 5 degrees, which would be very pleasant. In fact, we're seeing this month, we're having temperatures, even during the morning today, was in the 60s. That's not normal for July. That's because they're doing everything they can to harm nations that won't go along with them. That's why they've tried numerous times to kill Vladimir Putin. Vladimir they've attempted to eliminate him numerous times, and they're not succeeding, and they're freaked out by the fact the next meeting in Moscow is going to put a spike right through the European economy, and the tipping point is coming. Well, I really don't think, a lot of people think it's going to be catastrophe. What I think is going to happen is a lot of things could be changed if we just simply pass Glass-Steagall. If people personally don't bank on it, read your book, you and Craig Smith, start getting themselves out of putting their money in the bank, can be minimal amounts of money in the bank, realizing that many of the kinds of investments they have are leveraged in debt that's going to blow up. Have things like gold and silver, have prepper supplies, have nutraceuticals that'll keep you well, things that are barterable, like our Nutriodine, like wellness nutraceuticals and so on, like things that are going to be able to be exchanged with other people when the economy goes to that.
Yeah, and the one thing you want to avoid is anything denominated in dollars, things that can be run off a printing press in Washington, D.C. Those can be devalued to nothing overnight. By the way, you mentioned our book, Don't Bank on It. If people want to get pencil and paper, I'll tell you how you can get it absolutely free and postpaid. Won't cost you a penny, and we can do that once people get pencil and paper. But you're right, Greece by itself, in theory, should not be that big a deal. I mean, it's a country of less than 11 million people. It has an economy, as Paul Krugman of the New York Times likes to say, an economy roughly equivalent to metropolitan Miami, Florida.
Yeah.
It is, or far less than, say, South Carolina in the U.S. economy. It is not a big deal. It only accounts for about 2% of the economy of Europe. The problem that these other countries like Germany are facing is that it could be the trigger that starts the landslide, the avalanche. It could be the trigger that If it's given a special deal to make it shut up and go away, then all the other countries that are considerably bigger, like Spain, Portugal, Italy, they're going to turn and say, hey, we want that same deal. And at that point, you would see Europe, or Germany in particular, dumping out another trillion and a half dollars to try to cover the similar debts that those other countries have. So what Greece does could be very dangerous. It could lead people out of the euro. It could break the European unity. It could start dominoes toppling in these other countries, not only out of Europe, but potentially toward the new Russian-Chinese bloc of the BRICS countries.
Well, I got a little different spin on that. I think what's going to happen, the euro is going to collapse, and what's going to happen is that America and the transnational corporations want to devalue the U.S. dollar. I think it'll actually cause increased value of the dollar, because ultimately with a deal with the BRICS nations and the European Central Banks and so on, the IMF, they would want to increase the value of the renminbi and the ruble so that they can buy more goods. But the fact is, if they make that deal, which I think is coming, with Russia and China, this is a very hard game. I think they're going to wake up saying, we got more buying power, but we lost control of our economy. So Russia and China will lose control of their central controlled economies. They're communists. And temporarily, at least for a while, the American dollar is going to be increased in value. There's going to be a flight of currency to the U.S. dollar, believe it or not, which has happened over the last few years. The problem is they're all falling, but the U.S. dollar is falling less.
The dollar is falling more slowly. So, yes, we, relatively speaking, become a safe haven.
Right, so I think it's going to save...
Ultimately, though, the dollar will not be a safe haven. You'd be much better off going into something tangible.
Exactly, yeah. So my guess is that take those tangible, those tangible assets and get out of the dollar, and realize that at some point down the road, after they've forced Russia and China and these other countries, because we try to get the impression that the BRICS nations are an alternative. They're not really an alternative. They're basically a manufacturing haven by the transnational global corporations. Russia basically is a single energy-based economy. It hasn't advanced. China is a very, very bad actor. I mean, they don't respect patents or intellectual property rights. They don't have proper...
As of today, they're struggling to keep their own stock market propped up.
Right, and the thing is, half of their loans in their country for business loans are shark loans at 20% or higher. China, to me, is another house of cards about to collapse. And all they need to do is lose their customers or have the U.S. dollar appreciate against the renminbi, which will temporarily cause an increase in surge. But if the Chinese lose their customers, which is us, they're dead in the water. And I don't think that they keep on building up this big military and they're going to kind of fight America. Come on, China. You're being suckered into this, and I think what's going to happen is ultimately they're going to lose control of their centrally controlled communist economy, and their game of the last 25, 30 years of 80% of the new billionaires being Chinese PLA, People's Republican Army members, is going to be over real soon.
Yeah, of course, the dirty little secret, as you often allude to, is the fact that the whole global economy is a house of cards at this point. We can quibble over which one is stronger, which one is weaker. But, for example, the U.S. stock market is overvalued by at least 86%.
Sure.
The zero-interest rate, free money being offered on loan by the Federal Reserve has been used by companies to buy back their own stock. That's made their own stock artificially more valuable, but they're not producing anymore. They're not selling anymore. The economy is actually a basket case. They've just created a kind of casino illusion out of the stock market by these buybacks and other manipulations. But the whole economy is basically very, very weak here, too. It's just because we have resources and so on, we're a little stronger and a little more diversified than other countries. By the way, in Germany's behalf, I do want to say you're going to be seeing a lot of footage in the next few days or weeks about people starving and suffering and being out of money and, oh, they're miserable in Greece. You need to understand the European powers have bailed Greece out before. In May 2010, the Eurozone and IMF gave Greece a rescue package of $110 billion, or that is $148 billion. I was quoting a number in euros. In 2011, they were given a second bailout, amounting to another $173 billion. They were given a special ending of 53% of all their private debt to creditors. I mean, their debt, half their debt was forgiven and more. So they've already gotten more than $321 billion in bonuses. And where is this little country of only about 10 million people? It's $353 billion in debt again. In other words, their whole idea of economics is to spend, borrow, and tax. It is not to do anything productive. They really have almost no industry at all in Greece. And so they're just a big nation with its hand out saying, we need you to lend us more money today so we can pay last month's credit card bill. And basically the other nations of Europe are just tired of that.
The problem is that they've got an integrated system now that when the Jenga stick of Greece is pulled, I think you're going to see a temporary evaluation of the dollar. You're going to see the economy of China crash, because when Europe crashes, it's going to have a very negative effect on the Chinese, isn't it?
Well, but this is part of the trap that Germany, with its attempt to conquer Europe financially, has set up. It's a world now where any money they give to Greece is just good money thrown after bad.
Right.
I mean, Greece is never going to be able to, even if it wanted to, it will never be able to repay the debt it has.
Well, what they should do, and you've talked about this before, they should, number one, this year coming up is a Jubilee year. After the 23rd of June, the Elul 29. So what should really happen is the debt should be forgiven. We should put Glass-Steagall in. We should prevent banks from speculating in people's money. We should get rid of policies that say that you're an unsecured investor, so that the banks wonder we're going to grab people's pension funds and their deposits in their accounts. We should have a standard, whether it's a gold standard or whatever, so that the current amount of money is based on the capacity of the economy to generate goods and services and intellectual property. I think it's even a better standard than the gold standard, but gold has been around forever, so it's going to continue to be a currency, whether people like it or not, which is why people are paying a premium to get physical gold, not paper gold. And
as well they should.
Yeah, and there's a big difference. And, China and India have we would call it an illegal real gold market going like crazy. And
of course, in a Jubilee year, mortgages and everything else are forgiven.
They should be, Wouldn't it be nice to just walk in your house and say, the mortgage is gone, dear. It's ours. And welcome back. And very important to understand what's really going on in terms of the whole process here. I tell people, don't panic. We can buffer through this, but you have to take personal action. You shouldn't rely on your local politicians and on your governments or your whatever. You should realize that if you take specific actions, like in the book, don't bank on it, you can buffer yourself against what's coming. You can get yourself out of debt. You can get yourself moved into financial instruments like collectibles and get out of dollars, get into your prepper supplies and nutraceuticals, get yourself into exchanging things. We talked with Professor McCanny, we'll have him on later this week, about the idea of a peer-to-peer encrypted network, which will be fully encrypted, so the FBI and the NSA can never break it. An encrypted electronic barter currency that's based on bartering specific goods, services, including gold and silver, including these noodle carrot things or tiny pieces of gold. And the idea that people need to start taking control of their life and disconnecting from the system, which is what you're really saying to people, isn't it? You're talking about a systematic personal responsibility and disconnection from a system that's going to impoverish them and enslave them. Isn't that right?
Well, it's a system that treats them like cattle. I found it amusing that Hillary Clinton's campaign this last weekend actually put a rope around the reporters covering her campaign and were literally herding them like cattle to keep them away from her. But more and more, that's how government views us. We are simply the beings here to be taxed and bled and so on to serve them. And when we become old enough, then you will not be able to look to the government healthcare system that taxed away your ability to support yourself. If you look to the system will say, well, you're 79, you're not paying taxes anymore, you don't deserve a kidney transplant, go die.
Well, that's part of Obamacare. The way medical
care ultimately is under Obamacare. By the way, you mentioned our book. If folks would like this book, absolutely free. It's a 256-page, 27 pages of documentation book, an amazing read. It reads a lot like a novel, as I think you would attest. It asks the big questions, like what would happen if Jesse James tried to rob a cashless bank in Stockholm, Sweden today? A bank that had no physical money in it at all. It's all electronic transfer under government control. So that kind of robbery won't happen anymore, but government robbery of everything you have will be your entire life, virtually. The book is called Don't Bank on It, The Unsafe World of 21st Century Banking, and we'll be happy to give it to you absolutely free and postpaid. My co-author, Craig Smith, doesn't need the money from selling a few books. We just are trying to save the world for our grandchildren and for Dr. Bill's grandchildren and so on. And to do that, we want to arm everybody with information so you can protect yourself, so you're not being conned by the government anymore, so you realize that you don't even own your bank account. Not that it matters, because if anything happened to your bank account, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation only has enough money to insure one out of every $14 in the system anyway. I mean, the system will go down, and when it does, think how much things like nutraceuticals will be worth, especially to those who actually want to go on living. So the point being, we'll give you the book absolutely free. All you need to do is call a toll-free number, 800-630-1494. That's 1-800-630-1494. Or as I like to say, think of Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, but not quite. It's 1-800-630-1494. You can also get our free new white paper on Greece. What is it called? The Greek Showdown. And it could very well break the back of the euro and the European attempt to create a United States of Europe to compete with us.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is, these are the steps that I think will happen. I think Greece is going to take the BRICS alternative. It's an economic phase of World War III, which is what it is, because we're in the economic phase of World War III now. The next step is a relative increase in valuation of the dollar at this time when there's still more credit being pulled out. So small and medium businesses are not doing well, and the stock market is artificially being inflated. So people are going to feel strangely secure because the dollar will evaluate. That will also, by the way, because of valuation, it'll temporarily pump up business in China and other countries. But the whole system, the credit thing, is what's going on. The velocity of money is decreasing. The Baltic Dry Index has been the lowest in 50 years. The amount of credit for small and medium business, the amount of people that are working full-time jobs, there's more people unemployed or receiving some benefits than the entire working population of America.
The velocity of money is its lowest in 50 years, too, even though, according to Keynesian theory, you put trillions of dollars of stimulus in, we should have very high money velocity, but instead it's gone the other way.
Well, it's like a vascular bypass. It bypasses the gut, or the actual economic engine that generates goods, services, and intellectual property, and it goes back to the banks, just like the loans that go to Greece. Over 90% of that money doesn't go to the Greeks. It goes back to the banks to loan the money in the first place, but it's on the ledger for the Greeks. Well, the same thing when you have derivatives. You have basically gambling with money, which is multiple times the GDP of the entire planet by many, many times.
Right,
and
but there's still debt, and ironically, that debt is carried by the taxpayers across Europe.
Right, which is what's happening here in America. People think, well, my taxes pay for my health care or my roads or this, that. No. Your taxes are not even paying for the full interest on the United States debt now. And as a result, the actual debt is increasing because they have to print more money to make up the difference. And what we should be doing with the Federal Reserve is just writing it off, getting back to a credit system like a Hamiltonian system, having gold backing of the currency, or what I call a basket of commodities, intellectual property, physical production that the United States makes. And we should value currencies of other countries, and we should not make multilateral agreements like the Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic Partnerships. It should all be unilateral. We should deal with each nation at a time and decide what kind of deal is best for them and us. Right?
The Greek radical leader, Mr. Tsipras, staged this election to say, I want voters to decide on the offer from Europe. Well, Europe would withdraw on the offer 5 days before the election. There was no offer on the table.
Well, what was he doing?
Then he went into the campaign and he said, if you hate giving any more to Europe, vote no. And if you want me to have a stronger negotiating hand to negotiate how much more we'll give to Europe, vote no. So in other words, by voting no, you could actually be voting yes or no on whether to pay more money to Europe. It was a very surreal election in that regard, all over a proposition that Europe had withdrawn 5 days earlier.
Yeah, and so in other words, it's just basically dancing with the devil in the deep blue, you know.
Oh, sure. And then Mr. Tsipras on Monday went into a meeting with the European powers, or phoned them, had a telelink meeting, and they just turned to him, Merkel and the French, and said, "We're not going to give you anything." And he went to Christine Lagarde, running the International Monetary Fund, and she said, "I can't give you anything until you pay all the debt you now have in arrears. It's against IMF rules." So in other words, Greece was just told, okay, you staged this little election show, you're going to get nothing for it. Absolutely nothing.
Well, what will probably happen out of this is you'll see a Russian pipeline come in, Russian ships and military hardware coming into Greece. The Russians, rather than modernizing their own industry, they're going to spend a ton of money on their new 42-plus nuclear weapons, new carrier battle groups. The same with the Chinese. By the way, the Chinese, because the economy has been bad, their container carriers, they've disassembled since January about a half a dozen or more of these giant container carriers because they're the Worldwide Baltic Dry Index, meaning the manufacturing in China. They build 100,000 warehouses just to store the stuff they're making that they can't sell. So the Chinese are teetering on catastrophe.
By the way, we're doing the same thing with our inventories here.
Right.
I mean, we would be in negative growth if it weren't for all the buildup of inventories we're doing here.
Right.
I predict in today's paper, by the way, you will see the BRICS become the GRE-BRICS. In other words, Greece will be added to BRICS.
Oh, I guarantee it. You're absolutely right on that. I believe that's going to happen. I think what it's going to do is it's going to intensify the military side of the preparation for World War III. And I think that we're not going to have an immediate collapse. In fact, if anything, it says, like in the Bible, it says, that do not harm the oil and the wine, but an omer of wheat for a day's wages. So what we're looking at
we explain a lot of these things in the book, Don't Bank on It. I hope people will get it at 800-630-1494. We'll pay the postage and everything.
Yeah, amazing analysis of what's going on. Again, just prepare yourself and get yourself buffered against what's coming. You'll do fine. The problem is we can deal with these issues if we were honest about it, but honesty is a rare thing in today's comedy of finances and politics, isn't it?
Well, Dr. Bill, God bless you for being a beacon of light in the darkness.
Thank you, Lowell Ponte and Craig Smith, for your amazing book, Don't Bank on It, and all your documents. I'll be posting those up, and people can read them later. The letter about Greece is quite amazing, revealing.